Hey everyone, and welcome back to the bonus exercise section of Practical CSS Grid. This is bonus exercise number 1. We're going to be creating an interesting multi-promo banner for the top of your homepage. And this is in direct relation to a lot of client requests I used to get when I worked at an agency. And that is, we want to have a lot of promotional space up top on our website. So we want a rotator, we want a carousel, and that's objectively not a particularly good design choice. Many carousels get very, very bad click-through rates. And so we wanted to have interesting designed banner areas that were able to handle more than one promotional space. And so we came up with this design pattern that was an interesting asymmetrical grid at the top for 4 promotional spaces. And as you can see here, here's the finished product of what we're going to be working on in this exercise. We have 4 promo spaces. One takes up 2 rows and 2 columns, or at least it appears to take up 2 columns. And then the other 3 get progressively smaller in space. This visual weight distinction lets a user know which is the most important promotional space on the page. And so to accomplish this, when we actually first started rolling out this design pattern, we didn't have access to CSS Grid yet. This was multiple years ago. So we had to do this in either Flex or Floats. And to do this in Flex-based layouts requires a lot of additional markup on the page. You need to craft your columns and your rows in individual divs on the page, and that's a lot of containers that are unnecessary with the power of Grid. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the code. We're going to close out of our finished product here and take a look at where we're starting this. We just have the 4 promos and a little bit of CSS to accomplish the background images, the background color overlays, as well as a little bit of extra down there just so you could see the title centered vertically and horizontally, and we're using Flexbox to do that here with the display flex and those alignment properties. Also, we're setting a font size on the headline, not a whole lot past that. The markup of this is strictly one container, a section with a class of banner, and then inside that we have the 4 anchor tags. Now you could have these be different types of elements inside of it if you needed to account for more structured data inside of it. But in terms of the layout, all we need are the 4 children elements of one container element. So let's go ahead and scroll down, and we're going to go ahead and work through creating the layout we want to. We're going to do that the same way we've been doing it. We're going to create a banner class in our CSS, and we're going to display grid. Again, that sets this as a grid context item so that its children will all flow into whatever columns and rows that we create. We're going to create a grid template columns. And in this, we're only going to create 3 columns because we want that first one to be asymmetrically larger. So we're going to let that one be 2FR space 1FR, 1FR. And what that's doing is it's creating the appearance of 4 columns, but we don't actually have to have all of that in there. So we'll save that in. We'll take a look at where we're at. So what you can see here is we have our 4 promo spaces flowing in to multiple rows already. So let's go ahead and take a look in Firefox DevTools. We'll turn on our grid inspector, and you can see we have 1 column over here on the left, 2 columns on the right, and by default our grid is going to want to enter the content in one at a time to each of those. So the first thing we need to do is specify where we want our elements to go. And we're going to use the grid template area syntax that we used a couple exercises ago, grid template areas. And we're going to specify a few different area templates. We're going to say in our first one, we want the first item, and then we're going to have a second, and that's going to create that 2 column spanning on the right-hand side. And then we're going to move into our second row, and we're going to have the first element also span down to that second row, and then we want third and fourth. I'm going to keep them as lined up as I can here. Don't forget your semicolon at the end. I do that all the time. And just for my own mental sake, we're going to go ahead and add a grid gap in here, grid gap 1 rem. And again, that's inserting that 1 rem marginal space inside of our grid and not going to do anything to the outside. So then here we see a grid that has a 1 rem gap, and again, there is no difference in the layout yet, because we need to explicitly place our grid items inside of the cells we want them to go in, inside those areas. So we're going to add a promo with a first child. Actually, we'll do nth child just so we keep them all the same. Nth child 1. And then we're going to have this enter in the grid area first. Again, there's no quotation marks around that. That is now a reserved string inside of CSS. And the great thing about this is automatically it's going to now span those 2 rows. So we'll go ahead and close this out a little bit so we can see. So 2 rows of space for our first promo, and then the other ones are automatically going to fill in on the right. Now, if you had 5 promos, you could very easily have a grid on the right that is all 5 or the 4 extra promos. We only have an additional 3 promos. So let's go ahead and specify we want the second child, so promo nth child 2, to go in the grid area of second. Save that in, refresh the page, and now you can see our layout has changed a little bit because the spacing isn't quite right on our rows. They're all automatically spaced by their content, but you can see that we now have a full 2 columns of space for the second promo. Now we want to finesse our rows a little bit to make them look a little bit closer to where we were. We're going to do that with grid template rows. And from here, we're going to specify a min-max. If you'll remember from our automatically grid-sized responsive video that I believe is exercise 2, we specify as min-max, and it takes 2 parameters, the minimum and the maximum. We're going to go ahead and say we want a minimum of about, we'll say 15 VH, so 15 viewport units tall, and a maximum of auto, which actually will make that 1 FR, so that we can space it determined on its content as well. So we'll come back here, and now you can see we have our section, and then each of these rows is now spaced around 10 VH, except for these down here, which are actually in the second row. So even though you're using min-max, these are grid templates, not auto rows. And so we're going to go in, and we're going to specify 2 of these. We're going to use that repeat functionality that we had many exercises ago. And we're going to say 2 times, we want you to do this. Save that in. So I think I have an S in there that I don't want. Repeat. There we go. Save that in. And now each of these takes up at least 15 VH. And then if we had content that grew in here, which let's go ahead and add a little extra content in our dev tools. Save that in. The second row can grow to accommodate as much as it needs to accommodate. And as you can see, because we use the FR, the top row also accommodates that. If we used auto, we would have the bottom row grow and the top row not, which would end up giving us not quite the asymmetry that we were looking for. That's a perfectly valid design pattern, but it's not one that we are utilizing here. So let's go ahead and take a look at that real fast. Oops. Let's save in that content in the HTML. Just up here. Go ahead and have the third promo spot have a little extra content. Give it a little more content so we can see how it grows properly. So now you can see that top promo space is a shorter promo space, but that means that this bottom one is getting more and more visual weight, which is not exactly what we wanted. That's why I went with 1VR versus automatically sizing it based on the content. So you can see Grid is going to allow for us to create more and more interesting patterns for the rest of our designs. No longer do we need to have a carousel at the top of the page to accommodate multiple promos. We can now put them directly on the page like this and not have to introduce layers upon layers upon layers of markup to do it. So that's it for this exercise. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next promo banner, but I want you to kind of maybe take a look at this and see how you would change this to fit the promotional needs of your clients or your stakeholders at your company. See you in the next exercise.